Let's start in the Big Ten. In the Big Ten, I think that we all can agree. Most preseason polls, mine included, last week I had Ohio State 1, Oregon 4. Oregon and Ohio State are kind of they're your favorites in the Big Ten. And I think most of us agree on that. I think that the question is there a threat to those top two? I think that's the biggest question, even more so than like, how do the West Coast teams do? There's this consensus with Ohio State and Oregon, and then who's going to threaten them? And so who are the candidates? The candidates for me are three of them: Michigan, Penn State, and USC. And let's just start right off the bat. I asked that question, and if you're a Michigan fan listening to this, you probably slapped the dashboard, threw something down, spit out your drink, and you're like, what do you mean, who's the threat? We're the defending national champions. Who's the threat? To the team we just beat 3 times? I get it. And fair enough. That's why Michigan is the biggest threat to those top two. I do believe that there is somewhat of a consensus that Ohio State and Oregon are at the top, and that Michigan, because of everything that they lost, is going to have to be somewhat of an underdog this year. I think that that's fair. It's a fair sentiment. And yet, if you are a Michigan fan, or certainly inside of that building, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, what is this guy talking about? We just went 15-0. We did not change our culture. We're building from within. We are developing from within, like we have this entire time. The last 3 years has been magical in Ann Arbor, and that's why they are continuing, and that's why they will be the biggest threat to Ohio State or Oregon. It doesn't matter who is left, because they believe they're the biggest threat. They believe they're the kings of the hill. They believe that the conference goes through them. We might see that early in the year when they play Texas. The other part of this is not just this self-belief, which kind of lives in the air, but it's also the tangible aspect of what Michigan does on the field. And that's, they put you in a bind. They just do. They play such a different style of football than most teams. And I think this year it'll be even leaned into more, because they don't have J.J. McCarthy to throw the ball as much as they did, or as efficiently as they did a year ago. They're going to lean into, as their coach Sharon Moore puts it, smash ball. That's going to be difficult for each of those teams. It's going to be difficult for Ohio State. It's going to be difficult for Oregon. It's going to be difficult for Texas. It's going to be difficult for USC, because it's not what other teams do. And this has been really the secret, their toughness at the line of scrimmage over the course of the last few years. That's why they're the biggest threat. They're going to be excellent on defense. Very tough, very physical. The interior of that defensive line, you're not going to be able to move them. And I understand that Ohio State has a great secondary. I understand that Ohio State has great edge rushers, but does that matter if Michigan can run it 55 times? Maybe not. See, for the last 3 years, they've said, great, good for you. Look at all that skill on the outside, offensively and even defensively. And then they said, come on in here into a phone booth and see if you can win a fist fight. And they've won the fist fight. They've won the fist fight. They believe they're the king of the mountain. That's why they're the biggest threat. They believe it. You can walk around anywhere else in the country, and everywhere else in the country, people are talking about Ohio State. People are talking about Oregon. In Ann Arbor, you walk into the building at Michigan, nothing's changed. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen in my life. Go there for the spring game, and I'm walking around, and I'm like, man, look at that. New head coach, a new coordinator, new strength coach, new quarterback, all the new. And Donovan Edwards is looking at me like, what do you mean new? Nothing's new. Nothing's changed. We are Michigan. I was like, okay, all right. So they're the biggest threat. The other two candidates, Penn State and USC, I think a lot has to go right for each of those teams. The reason I didn't pick them as the biggest threat is, one, Penn State, they just don't play a style of football that scares Ohio State, because they play a similar style. And Ohio State can say, hey, listen, we feel like we've got a better roster than you do. Okay? And I think that that's fair, and I think that that's played out. We saw that play out last year in Columbus. We saw it play out in State College 2 years ago. So while I believe in Penn State and while I think that they could have a really good year and the schedule sets up favorably for them, I don't view them as the threat that I think Michigan is, and a lot of that is the style. They're trying to play on equal footing for Ohio State rather than taking them into a matchup that maybe they're not prepared for or don't want to play. And the same could be said for Oregon as well. And then USC, I put them in there just because, man, I'm bullish on USC. I want to plant a flag in the preseason for USC. I think they're going to be better than most people believe this season. I think Lincoln Riley is going to have an excellent year. I think that they're going to take the Big Ten, and it's going to be difficult for some of those defenses to face this offense. I think their defense should be better. Their offense should be the same. That's what we can come to expect. At least I do, which means USC is a threat, just not the biggest threat, certainly to Ohio State and Oregon. All right, so let's go to the SEC. Similar question. It'll be different style of question as we get to the next two after this. But this one is similar because I think that at the outset, it's a similar sentiment. And that sentiment is that Georgia and Texas are kind of clear favorites and clearly the class of the SEC. Almost everybody will have them in their top four. And rightly so. Rightly so. I did. I had them at 2 and 3. Man, they're good. Georgia, in a lot of ways, is the premier team in the country. 2 championships in the last 3 years. Kirby Smart, I said it last week. I'll repeat it here. He is the best coach in college football. He builds the best roster. He's the most aggressive. He gets the most out of his players. He's going to have a Heisman contending quarterback back. I mean, we all know what Georgia is and what they're going to present. I think the same can be said for Texas. We all know that Texas is going to be an elite team. I have them ranked 3rd in my preseason poll. Steve Sarkisian has done an outstanding job building a foundation at Texas that is sustainable. What he took over was a program, let's face it, in disarray. And then I think people from the outside said that he underachieved early, and now what he's built is something that most people are proud of there in Austin, which is I think, national championship caliber team. He's done it through roster building, through development. The question for me about Texas is going to be on the defensive side. Is the defense better, even with losing their defensive tackles? So then what's the question for the conference? If these two teams are the class of the conference, what's the question? It's the exact same question as the Big Ten. Who's the threat? So, which team do we believe here at the Joel Klatt Show can go up there and be a threat to those two? The answer is Alabama. The answer is Alabama. Whether I have them ranked there in the preseason or not, I've got Ole Miss 5th and Bama behind them, but the threat is Alabama. And it's in the similar vein as the threat in the Big Ten being Michigan. And that's because they believe they're the threat. They've done it. They've done it. Listen, say what you will about Kalen DeBoer coming in and it's a new this and new that. Georgia's still the one that has an Alabama problem. I know Bulldog fans are not going to want to hear that, but they have had, you can call it a Nick Saban problem if you want. It's a Tide problem. They don't do well with the laundry, if you know what I mean. Bama is never going to feel outmatched. Their roster is built to play at the highest level. Their players have played at the highest level. They just beat Georgia last year. They just played in the playoff. They just had a 4th down in the Rose Bowl to beat the eventual national champion. They will not back down at any moment, and you can't say that about the other 2 teams that I considered here, which is Ole Miss and Missouri. See, when those 2 teams, you can evaluate them in the preseason, and you can say to yourself, yeah, they're going to be really good, and they will, I love Missouri's schedule. I like that both of these teams have their quarterback back. Lane Kiffin did an incredible job in the offseason building this roster to a roster that is an elite roster in college football. The problem is neither of these teams have done it against those teams. Now, you can say Missouri just beat Ohio State, but everybody understands that bowl game was different. You had freshmen playing quarterback for the Buckeyes, and that roster was not anywhere near what I think most people felt like Ohio State was during the course of the year. I think that's a fair sentiment. It's a fair sentiment. I don't want to take anything away from their win over Ohio State, but it's not a win that you can hang your hat on and you can say, we've done it. You see, Michigan can say they've done it. Alabama can say they've done it. And getting over those hurdles is tough. Those are the hurdles that are in front of Ole Miss and Missouri. Really good teams, believe in them a lot. Probably both playoff teams when you really look at it. But are they legitimate threats to those top two? I'm not sure because I haven't seen it. They're going to have to get over something. They're going to have to do something that they've never done before. Alabama is not. Even with Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer just won a conference title. So even as a head coach, he can say, I've won national titles at Sioux Falls. I've won the conference in the Pac-12. I just played for the national championship. Alabama players can sit there and say, we just beat Georgia in the SEC championship. They believe that they can. That's why they're the biggest threat in the SEC. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. And you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.